This is the way, at least one way, to do the histogram exercise on the Excel. We have data, which is the number of exercises at the end of the chapters of an algebra book. And this actually is something else because it says the data is in inches. Regardless, we've got numbers. We want to make a frequency chart, histogram, using this data. We have class limits, which are 70 to 79, 80 to 89, and so forth. And class limits are just the published version of what the boundaries will be. The class boundaries themselves are the actual limits. In this case, the boundaries and the class limits can coincide because we have discrete numbers. But in many cases, we'll have decimals so that a number like 79.5 would not fit into either 70 to 79 or 80 to 89. So it depends on the number of decimals. But beyond that, there's no real criteria for doing this, or no exact criteria. One way is to subtract from the lower limit and add to the upper limit so that we could go to 69.6, and the upper limit would then be 79.5, so that we have 69.6 to 79.5. The next one then is 89.6 or 80.6, 79.6 up to 89.5, and we can go on from there. And somehow we got an extra decimal in here. 89.5, that's not an actual 89.5. It's a comma, 0.5. So we can just add 10 to each of these things and get the limits that we want. I'm going to use the frequency autofill. Here's the fill command. I want to fill with the series, and I want to increase by 10. It's already got that because it has 69.6, 79.6, and we get those numbers. I'm going to knock off a decimal and then do the same thing for the upper limits. Fill command, series. The step value is 10. So we have filled the actual class boundaries. This doesn't really matter. This can be 69.9 to 79.1 and 79.2 to 89.1. Whatever makes a break in the data. Here, our upper and lower class limits make the break because there are no decimals. If there are decimals, we have to make an accommodation so that there is no missing value. There are no gaps in our categories. So these will do for what we have here. The midpoints simply represent the category. And there are a lot of explanations to do this, things to do. One way is to average the lower limits of successive classes. Here it would be 70 and 80. The average is 75. This is simply a number that represents the class. And if you look in a book, there may be a way to do it or a specific way to do it. It is not true. These are purely arbitrary. They represent the class, and there are problems no matter what you do. For example, if we have a class that goes from 70 to 79 or 80, and we pick 75 as the midpoint, the data could actually be skewed like so. So this 75 doesn't actually represent the class adequately. The data could be skewed the other direction. And if we pick a midpoint, we still aren't representing this. Also, each one of the classes may have a different layout, so that it could be either this or this, rather than being consistent. So what we are assuming with the midpoint as the average of successive lower limits is that there's a nice normal distribution, and we have the middle value. So this is quite a bit of hand waving in here, and it's actually one way to misrepresent the data, or not misrepresent the data, you should say represent in an alternative faction. This is the alternative facts that you hear so much about these days. So midpoint, you want something that will represent the class and look logical. If somebody puts in 71.052 for a midpoint for this class, something's up. You need to look closer at what the characteristics are. But this one, we'll just put in the fill series, and here we'll have to add our 10 because it is left uncalculated. And there are the class midpoints. Again, this is arbitrary. It can be anything you want it to be, but if it's something other than standard looking, looks regular, something's going on, and you need to find out what the game is. Right. The frequency command will use the equals frequency from Excel, and the frequency command only uses the upper limits. And I'm going to take the class boundaries, copy these, and then paste them as values in a different spot, so that I have 79.5, 89.5, and so on, and the frequency command only uses the upper limit. It doesn't actually put things in categories. It says which number of this list is the smaller than. So these are the bins, which is the Excel term for the upper limits, and we're going to put frequency in these cells using the frequency command. There is another command for frequency. There are several commands for frequency, and there are several explanations for frequency elsewhere. But for this one, we block off the areas where we want the frequencies and begin the command equals FRE, and there is no other command in Excel that starts this way, so we get frequency. We can type in the whole thing or just double click that. Then the first information is the data array, and this is our data, comma, and then the bins array. Close it and press enter. And oh, this is an older version of Excel. In this one, this is an older version of Excel. This is the frequency command. Block off the categories, or the cells that you want the frequency to appear in, equals FRE, and we get frequency because this is the only command in Excel that starts with FRE. You can complete it or just double click it. The first is the data array, comma. The next is the bins array, and this is the one that we want here. Close it, and then in this older version of Excel, we need to do a Control-Shift-Enter for the array command. And here are the frequencies for these particular cells. And one way to check this is to copy the data, and you can do this with small numbers of observations. more easily, obviously. And we'll paste it in another spot, paste the values, and then with this, we're going to sort these, and this is back to editing. In this one, there are other layouts, larger screens, but we want to sort, have sort and filter, and we just want smallest to largest for this single list of numbers. And here we have our numbers. And you can see that 70 and 71 are less than 79.5, so there's 2, 84 in the 89.5, 92, 94, and so on. And in the last category, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers that are between 129.5 greater and 139.5. So these are our frequencies. I'm going to copy those and then paste in the frequency cell list the values. If you just paste the numbers, you will get something strange and it won't work. So here's our frequency. Now we want to make a histogram out of this. A histogram is just a bar chart. And this is important because the only thing that goes to the bar chart is the frequency values. I've got those listed, and they will be the heights of the bars. The x-axis will be completely arbitrary. So I've got those marked. Go to Insert, and I want Charts, and here is Insert Column or Bar Chart. We want just the standard 2D column chart. And here, the y-axis is the frequency, and we can adjust the decimals as we wish. But on the x-axis, we have sequence numbers. 2 is the first number in the list. 1 is the second number in the list. The next one is the third, value is 2, and so on. I want to change the x-axis so that I have categories. And one way to do this, and there are other ways, is to right-click and then select Data. Over on the right side, under Edit, there is a list that is the current values, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just the sequence numbers. I want to edit it, and then I can add an axis label range, which means I just go to the midpoints and mark it and say OK. And there are the midpoint values for the bar chart. And again, these are simply labels. We think of them as 75, 85, 95. The bar chart doesn't care. You could call them A, B, C, D, E, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, or whatever you want to call it. So this is purely arbitrary. We can change the title. We can put in the axis labels, and again, there's other ways to do this. This one, just click in the chart, we get the bars, and click on that chart element. We go to axis titles. It puts in titles that we can then change. Number of exercises, and this is frequency, and it's going in up here on this, on the input line. and we can change the size of the numbers, whatever we want to do. But this is a histogram for the number of exercises by how often that occurs. Two chapters have 75 exercises. One chapter has 85, and so on. And again, these numbers are made up, and this is a leftover exercise. The data are not actually inches, so this is just practice. We're making a graph. That's how you make the graph. We can change these, make them wider, narrower. I would encourage you to screw with this if you want. You format the data series. You can make the numbers closer together. Here's a series overlap. If we change that, we get different sizes if you change the gap width. We get 0. We push them together, then we need to put lines in to discriminate between the categories, and so on. There are a number of different things you can do to this once you get it into the graph, and Excel is really quite good at handling these things. Format the axis. We'll take out the decimals. 4, major, 1, minor, we don't want. And that gives us 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is simply one way to do this exercise and to put the labels on there.